I'm sure you're all familiar with the saying, if we don't learn from history, we're doomed to repeat it. It breaks my heart to say that in my lifetime now, I see a reoccurrence of the Holocaust throughout Europe, and yes, right here in America. So let me take you back to the early 1930s and how Hitler came to power through my story. This is my favorite picture of my mom. This is her as a teenager, her younger sister Lisa, her older sister Edel, her best friend Selma. The older sister, unfortunately, plus her husband Otto, and almost all of my family were never able to get out of Germany in time, and they were murdered by the Germans. This is my dad, his younger brother Willie. There was an older brother Siegbert, and all three served in the German army, World War I. Now 1933, and Adolf Hitler becomes the Chancellor of Germany. He never hid his disdain for the Jewish minority, even though we're less than 1% of the German population. The vast majority of Germans adored him. There were huge rallies in his honor. By 1935, the German parliament passed the Nuremberg laws. Now, their purpose was simply to separate the Jewish minority from the rest of the German people.
This year they say there are 800,000 pairs of boots standing heel to heel, waiting for the Führer's final speech. And the high spot comes when, after a detailed review of Nazi achievements, Hitler cries, "My life's fight has not been in vain." Und wir werden in unserem Zeichen wieder siegen!
This is our house. We had sort of a dry goods store, and this was rented out to a German couple. There were just a handful of Jewish families, so every one of my friends were not Jewish. According to my mother, there were almost daily parades in honor of Adolf Hitler in Kirchheim. The first Nuremberg law was no non-Jew was permitted to work in a Jewish home. No non-Jew was allowed to shop in a Jewish store. And I remember watching two members of the Nazi Party in full uniform marching back and forth in front of our front door. No Jewish child was permitted to continue public school. After class, the teacher calls me to her desk and tells me I can't come back to school because I'm a Jew. I remember wandering out into the schoolyard, and the friends I'd walked to school with that morning, they'd left. And the only ones left in the schoolyard were just a handful of young German boys who followed me home, taunting me all the way. In the meantime, in Germany, the situation for the Jews was getting worse, almost on a daily basis. One day, they had passed a decree, and suddenly every Jewish male found himself with a middle name, Israel. And every Jewish female got a middle name, Sarah. But so much worse was to happen to German Jews. The next big catastrophe was November 9th and 10th, 1938, the night of the broken glass. That night, we Jews lost all of our civil rights. 400 synagogues burned to the ground in one night. After Kristallnacht, there wasn't a Jewish person in Germany who didn't want to leave. Our big problem was where to go. What country would help us? My dad, who can trace his ancestry way back to the 15th century, had in his possession his grandmother's Bible. And on the back pages of the Bible were names and addresses of family members that had emigrated from Germany throughout the years. And he wrote to all of them and finally got just one response from a very, very distant cousin. Lived right here in America, Henry Katz. And he wrote my dad that he would help us come to America. But of course, these things take time. My dad gets an unexpected phone call from a former classmate. He now owned a travel agency, and he told Dad, I have room for one person on a ship which is going to Cuba. One day, Mom gets a phone call. There's so many German Jews leaving Germany for Cuba. We set up this huge, luxurious liner. It's going to hold 1,000 people. May 13th, 1939, Mom and I boarded a ship in Hamburg, Germany called the St. Louis. We started in Hamburg, going all the way down till we hit Cuba. I was 8 years old at that point. It had 8 decks. It had a large toy room, 2 swimming pools. A few days before we arrived in Cuba, Gustav Schröder, the German captain, gave a ball. Our day of arrival in Cuba, I'll never forget. I was very excited because as I looked overboard, I see my dad. He's standing up in this tiny little rowboat waving up at us. Then each day I would say to Mom, so when are we getting off the ship? And her answer was always the same, tomorrow. Every passenger had to purchase a legal landing certificate signed by Cuba's Minister of Immigration. But the Cuban government refused us entry, would not allow us off the ship. So here we were, almost 1,000 German Jews stuck on a ship, not knowing what to do. In the meantime, Gustav Schröder was getting cablegram after cablegram, bring the ship back to Germany since the people can't get off the ship. Following the St. Louis, 2 other ships, all filled with German Jews leaving Germany for Cuba. So we were stuck in Cuban waters. They turned their ships around, heading back to Germany. When they got back to Germany, the German government said you lost your citizenship after leaving, and they went to concentration camps. Instead, our captain began to send cablegrams to the American government. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who was president, never responded. This story of the St. Louis became worldwide news. One day, I feel the lurching of the ship and I realize we're moving. I rush into Mom's cabin only to see her lying on her cot, sobbing uncontrollably. I had no clue as to where we were headed. I would have been even more scared if I'd realized the adults had no clue where we were going. And the captain was frantically trying to find a place for us to go to. We passed the Miami coastline so close. One final cablegram from Gustav Schröder to the president, pleading with him to allow the 200 kids aboard the St. Louis sanctuary in America, to which he didn't respond. So then we began to circle the Atlantic Ocean. Finally, a Mr. Trooper, who was the head of the Joint Distribution Committee, an organization that helps people in distress, came to our rescue and found 4 countries to take us in: England, Holland, Belgium, and France. The entire ship went to Antwerp, Belgium. Roughly around 250 passengers went to England. Mom and I went to Holland, and there were 181 of the passengers that went to Holland. I remember boarding a much smaller ship, and as we were gliding along the Dutch coastline, hundreds of people were on the hills, and as we passed, they all seemed to be clapping and cheering us on. We went to Rotterdam, and in Rotterdam we were put into a detention camp. I was put in what they called a children's compound, and Mom was placed in an adult compound. It was really a filthy camp. There wasn't a blade of grass. There was nothing but dirt and rocks, lots and lots and lots of rocks. So Dad legally comes to America, no problem, gets to Miami and sends her a cablegram. Arrived safely in Miami. All we needed were the papers to come to America. The quota number had been up. We left the camp, went to Antwerp, Belgium, where we had a wonderful surprise. Mom's younger sister, Liesel, she and her husband were in Antwerp taking the same ship. Complete coincidence. What had happened, Walter, on Kristallnacht, he had been taken to the Buchenwald concentration camp. So when he was able to get out of the camp, they went to Antwerp as we did. And it was just a wonderful coincidence that we were going to take the same ship to the USA. Finally hit New York Harbor. I see my dad running toward me from the shore. Picks me up and he twirls me around, and I'm happy. And I realize how exceedingly lucky I am to be in this wonderful country we call the USA, where we have our freedom. But I caution all of us that we have to really be vigilant so that we never lose this precious gift called freedom, for we all know freedom is not free. God bless America.